these last couple of days, I don't think there's anyone who will say, "Oh, this is what we were expecting." I think there's been a lot of shock, surprise, exhilaration, tepidness, all of these feelings from most of the Syrians that I've, been connecting with and connected with, whether family or friends, etc. And folks are, again, very exhilarated and excited for what may be coming, but also very tepid and, some worry as well in terms of, well, what does this all mean in the long term for, freedom for all the people of Syria? I think some of the questions that I've been seeing come up has been a lot of questions around timing, like why now? What's going on? What is this moment? And some kind of background that I would like folks to think about when they hear these questions and these conversations in terms of some of the factors. One, I think we cannot ignore the fact that since, for over a year now, Russia and Assad have been very aggressive in Idlib in terms of their bombing campaign. That's something that's very important. There wasn't some state of calm, and now all of a sudden, oh my God, the civil war is like, quote unquote, is being reignited. There's been a lot of aggression in Idlib for since the time that the genocide in Gaza started, honestly. And obviously the attention has been on Gaza, rightfully so. But there is that aggression that we cannot ignore when we're talking about why, why now this is happening. Obviously, we've seen that across the region, Assad has become more and more normalized. So many of the regimes, whether it's the UAE, and others have, welcomed back Assad. He was back, I believe that, at the Arab League meeting that happened a few months ago, he was back there, welcome. So like there's more no more even like pretending that Assad is not like just fully back in the circle of Arab dictatorships in the region. And I think that's another thing that folks need to keep in mind of just like why there might be a decision to be like, we need to break up this acceptance of Assad coming back into the fold. I would think that it's another factor. Um, Obviously, the realities of Hezbollah and Iran being weakened because of this last year and the Israeli aggression across the region is also a factor that I think we need to think about. And of course, there's the geopolitics of it all. Like, yes, Turkey has a role to play here in terms of their relationship with the various forces that are fighting, etc. And we can get into some of those details later if folks want to talk about more of that. So I don't want to pretend that geopolitics is not at play. And also geopolitics is one force. Like folks on the ground are making decisions also, groups are making decisions also in terms of what to do and what to not to do. And that's very important to keep in mind as we're talking about what's actually going on. Um, I think the exhilaration part, I think about it the same way folks, when the siege of Gaza was broken briefly last year and the exhilaration that people felt in terms of like, oh wow, like people are pouring out of Gaza, like the walls broken, the walls breached, people are leaving. I like that to me is what as I'm reminded seeing Syrians now in this moment of time being like, again, we don't know what's going to happen, but there is something, really powerful in seeing people returning to their homes and people and seeing prisoners being let out and seeing political prisoners and letting out and seeing, families reunited that haven't seen each other in years. So even I think that humanitarian, human aspect of it is very important to keep in mind, again, as we're thinking about this. I think the worry part, I think that, rightfully so, people have like, well, this is the group, who is leading in this moment of time, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, is one that does not have a really good history in terms of their relationship with the principles of revolution, of freedom and dignity. They have been ruling Idlib for a while now, so that's important to think about in terms of like who's in charge of the regions that we're talking about. Um, they're again historically have been more on the I hate the word extreme, but I haven't found a word to replace it. But they've been more on, the right wing, more extreme agenda. And also though, I think we've seeing the way a lot of people are engaging in this moment is wreaking a lot of also Islamophobia in terms of like not like, there was a break from HTS from Al Qaeda years ago. They are definitely not ISIS. But they are also not necessarily the group that most of us would be like, oh yes, we're so proud that this is the group leading the opposition forces at this moment in time, but we also deal with the reality of what it is. So again, these are the balance. It does not mean that they, interesting enough, they've been very um, a lot of what I've seen on social media of people being like, oh yeah, this is now all the minorities are at threat, et cetera, et cetera. We're seeing, leaders, various rebel group leaders being like, no, we're going to give assurances that folks are not going to be, there's not going to be violence amongst minority. We're going to protect you all, et cetera. So I think there is the impact also of people being like, no, we're not going to accept any group doing what is against the principles of revolution. Um, Again, that's what they say. We know their history. What does that mean in the future is up to still question. But also the reality is people in Idlib have actually risen up several times in the last few years against HTS when they have got, when they have been oppressive forces as well. So never again, I always remind people, it's the people in the end of the day who hold the principles of the revolution and the commitment to freedom and of dignity in a way that we can continue to kind of maneuver our way is always demanding accountability for all war crimes, no matter who is the perpetuator, because that makes sure then that everyone is held to account, even as we're understanding the contradictions at times of what's happening. Um, and yeah, I think the last thing I'll end it is just like I think we saw this last year with the genocide in Gaza was a lot of like expose, the liberal has in the US particularly were exposed in terms of their hypocrisy, their lack of principles when it comes to Israel. And I think these last 3 days have been a reminder that, there are parts of the left that sadly also are um very problematic and don't necessarily do not have the higher ground when it comes to their own critique of liberals, particularly around, the folks who are trying to push at this moment, like, well, this is obviously a conspiracy because the ceasefire happened in Lebanon, and now this front is opening up in Syria. So it's obviously a US, Turkey, Israel conspiracy to like cut weapons to Gaza in this time of need. And I don't know. I try to not still, it surprises me how it can still be shocked at the ridiculousness that comes out of certain parts of the left. But I do find it fascinating that like after 420 days of Assad literally doing nothing for the people of Gaza, that people still think he's some bulwark that like we need him in power or else the cause of Palestine is lost. And then like I have seen way too many people be like, why are the Syrian rebel groups not fighting Israel in this moment? Which is just blows my mind because obviously the maps we saw from Stanley, like y'all don't have no idea about geography. Like you want the people who are under siege hundreds of kilometers away with nothing but like guns and some rocket launchers to be fighting Israel versus the regime who obviously has you know kid jets and other and helicopters and other things if they really wanted to go ahead and defend Gaza in this moment. So I think this is something that we continue to struggle with in this moment of just like how do we get our folks on the left to be like y'all like our principles are our principles that we need to apply in any situation. But yeah, thank you all.
Thank you so much. Okay, Nidal, if you could begin.
Sure. Thank you, Stanley, and thank you, Ramah, and really nice to reconnect with all of you. I just want to mention very quickly, this is the first time I use and like in an event like my introduction as a Palestinian American. I have been always refugee in my life, and I became American only 2 months ago. I was joking with Stanley, like when I told him, should I use it? So he just put it. And I'm just mentioning that because, like, for the fact to remind everyone, especially because I'm gonna start where Rama ended about the left and their conspiracy theory and the way they think. And I just want to say that I was born and raised in a place that was starved to death and demolished by Bashar al-Assad, and it's a refugee camp, a Palestinian refugee camp. And I can't really think of any power on this earth that really starved and killed Palestinians by starvation, other than Bashar al-Assad and Benjamin Netanyahu and the IDF. However, Back to the topic. Before we started, I was listening to Jack Sullivan on CNN, and he was literally just repeating the words that the U.S. government used 11 years ago about the fear of the Islamic groups and radicalism and etc. And he completely dropped the fact that what we are seeing today is the consequences of the failure of the US policy, not only in Syria, but across the whole Middle East and the crisis of the Middle East. And what we are seeing today in Syria is the consequences of the collapse of the international system that started in Syria in 2011 and went through Ukraine in 2014, and now we are living it again in Gaza. So like in this sense, I don't think that we should be really surprised of what's going on today. However, what happened today and what's going on today and or what's happening today in northwest Syria started, the preparations for it started about 2 or 3 months ago. I would say maybe like August, between July and August. And the reason is that Bashar al-Assad literally, and now I'm laying facts, I'm not saying analysis, like Bashar al-Assad refused to sit with Erdogan and reconcile and let the refugees in Turkey return to Syria, and refused and rejected to sit on a table with him in Russia, in Moscow, unless Turkey withdraws from Syria, which was something really ridiculous to say, and like it's kind of a joke after 12 years. And like all the massacres and all the destruction in Syria, and Bashar al-Assad, he still thinks that he is in control and in power. However, what came in surprise, though, is that no one expected that the armed groups that, I don't know what to call them actually, because there are so many definitions, armed groups, Syrian opposition, the Islamic groups, whoever is fighting, did not expect that they will be taking over Aleppo this quickly and this fast. And I just want just to give you kind of an approach of like the size of Aleppo and the military operation. Aleppo is 10 times the size of Gaza, literally 10 times. Gaza is 365 square kilometer. Aleppo is 3,650 square kilometer. So, and like it did not take 2 days for this whole area to collapse and to fall in the hands of the Syrian opposition. Another comparison, also like to make it clear what's like between what's going on in Syria and what we have been seeing in Gaza. If you saw in Gaza the videos and the photos of the fighters of Hamas, they are wearing flip-flops. In Aleppo, what we see in the videos, we are seeing fully equipped fighters, and their equipment, like full gear, like boots, tanks, heavy weapons, and pads, and like it's prepared. And what I mean, and the Turkish government completely prepared for these groups for the fight. One thing also I want to emphasize here, that all the Syrian armed groups that we see today, they really do not have like as a structure, as a power. They don't own their decision. They are mostly controlled by the Turkish government and the Turkish intelligence. But also on the other hand, who are these fighters? If you look at these fighters and listen to their videos, they are like in their 20s, and these people, they were 10 to 15 years old maximum when the revolution started. i.e., when their families were killed, when their homes were demolished, and when their families were killed. Some of the fighters who are like I was watching a video, it almost like made me cry. He said, like, at this spot where I'm standing, my brother was killed 10 years ago at the doors, at the gates of Aleppo University. He's from Aleppo. And it's the first time that he returns ever since. And he's like maybe 20, 21 years old. So these are the people who are fighting today. These are the people who are returning today to where they belong, to their neighborhoods, to their homes, and literally this is what they are doing. And even like the fighters who are trying to go into Hama, they are from Hama, because let's just remember, people who are in Aleppo today are the population, the Syrian population, who was evacuated and evicted under agreements between the Russians and the Syrian opposition, or the Syrian regime and the Syrian opposition, from so many locations and areas in Syria, from Damascus, from southern Damascus, from Al-Ghouta, from Daraa, from Deir ez-Zor, and from other areas in Hama and in Homs. All Homs basically was evacuated and evicted to the north. Like remember some names like Al-Qusayr, like Daraya, like Al-Ghouta, all these names that we used to talk a lot about, and they were all under siege by the Syrian regime. All of these populations and people in these areas, they were evicted to the north, to Aleppo and Idlib. And these are like the fighters today. They are their sons and daughters who grew up in the camps in the north, displaced, and now they are trying to return to where they belong. It's just like I want us to remember. Now I'm just like talking and remembering. I'm just like literally just improvising what I'm saying, because what's going on is like the ultimate of craziness. Like we really did not. No one really can imagine that this will happen, and. And like just to understand how crazy and important it is, like Blinken today is in Ankara, and he's sitting with the Turkish foreign affairs minister, and he's telling him, and I'm just quoting the words I have heard today from his mouth, that what we have to what's going on is destabilizing, as if like Syria was stabilized or the region was stabilized. Like what is going on today, like I don't believe in the conspiracy theory, but also like we have like there is an action and reaction, and there are like really regional powers, like, and this is something that Ramah like said earlier in her presentation, that we should not drop. Netanyahu came out talking about the new Middle East, a new Middle East that he's proposing, but other powers in the region do not accept, mainly and specifically the Turks, that they are freaking out about the new Middle East that Netanyahu is proposing. And the Turks, what they have done, they said, okay, if Bashar al-Assad does not want to normalize and does not want to reconcile and make and let the refugees return to their homes, because there are 3 million refugees in Turkey today, let's just remember, and they are causing a lot of them and problems in the domestic politics in Turkey. But this is another discussion. And if Netanyahu does not want to stop the war in Gaza, and let's just also on the side, I'll just say this: Turkey is the only country in the region that has relationships with Israel, and they froze their relationships with Israel. They don't have any diplomatic relationships anymore. They took they withdrew their ambassador from Israel, and there has been a lot of back and forth between Turkey, between Erdogan and Netanyahu. So under all these conditions, and let's also remember that Trump is coming back to the White House, and the first thing Trump would think about is withdrawing. Let's remember what happened 20 in 20 when in his first term in 2016. The first thing he said, "We are withdrawing from Syria," and he's really decreased the number of soldiers of U.S. troops there, and also decreased the level of humanitarian assistance to Syria. And today, more than before, a U.S. withdrawn from northeast Syria, it means that it's gonna directly and 100% impact the national security of Turkey, because the situation today in northeast Syria is like very on the verge of a civil war between the Arabs and the Kurds. And the only thing that's preventing this war from happening is the U.S. presence in northeast Syria. So given let's just it's very complex, and it's very hard to really isolate the factors of what's going on today one by one. But this complexity all feed into the national security of Turkey. And I believe that what happened is 100% a Turkish move, and a Turkish move that reminded me of something I heard from a Turkish diplomat maybe 7 or 8 years ago. And I will close with that our options in Syria range from normalizing with Bashar Assad to killing him, and in between they have all the options open. The only worry that I really have today is that is the Russian reaction, whether they will carpet bomb so many areas the way they did in Aleppo in 2016 is something I find it very hard, because the level of areas that the Syrian armed groups took over, it requires a land military operation. It's very hard to be solved by air jets. And thank you for listening, and I'm willing to take any questions too.
Great. Thank you so much.